I hope people brought text of the Megillah with you. It can be in Hebrew, it can be in English, or whatever works for you. Oh, perfect. Art School, that's great. I know that one, Milton. Sometimes Hebrew and English can be helpful. If you read Hebrew, it can be helpful to have both, because we will be referencing it. And as I said last time, it's really too bad for me to put up text that's available everywhere on the screen, because it'll take up a lot of the screen. This way we can have more of a conversation. So going over a little bit of what we spoke about last time. Not everybody who was on was here last time, but does somebody, welcome Alice, somebody want to share something they took away from last time? Do a little kind of summary. Anybody? Go ahead, don't be shy. Or be shy, but say it anyway. Robert Moshe, something you took away from last time. Anything? Nothing? Zero. You do remember we spoke about Megillat Esther. Yes.
I have something.
Yeah, Helen, it's on. Did you watch it?
What?
You weren't on last time, I thought.
Yeah, I was on. I was on last time. Last Thursday, I wasn't
You
on.
weren't on the Thursday. Sorry, my mistake. I'm sorry. Sorry, Helen comes on to the Hebrew class too. Helen, please share something.
Okay, chapter 8, verse 1. Vayom hahu natan melech Achashverosh leEsther malkat Beit Haman sorer haYehudim.
Nice.
On that very day, King Achashverosh gave to Esther the queen the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. Sorer can mean enemy, or it can mean bind. And he talked about how when there is anti-Semitism, how that binds us together.
Right, thank you, Helen. That's beautiful. I forgot that I shared that. I mean, I remember, but then I forgot. So this is a tzor. This is a bunch of keys, tzor maftechot. And if you remember, by the way, we say it when somebody passes away, Tehei nishmatcha tzrora b'tzror hachayim. May your soul, Hallel is smiling, be bound up in the bonds or the grouping of eternal life, right? Everybody remember that? B'tzror hachayim, that word tzror. So the idea of a more midrashic explanation is that Haman was not just sorer hayudim from the word tsara, meaning distress, but also tzorer, somebody who bunches and gathers together the Jews, as we know is happening, because the Jews really were unified at the time, even though they were spread out in 127 provinces. What happened in the Megillah actually bound them together. So this is something we shared last time. Thank you, Helen, for reminding us. That was probably the best of the whole class. That little teaching is such a nice teaching. By the way, just so you know, this same Toby, well, I don't think Hallel was born yet, but made sure that we had a women's Megillah reading last year from Megillat Esther. So she feels very connected. I think she's excited she can attend. She's welcoming in somebody else. So we'll wait for just a moment. Thank you for reminding me of that, Helen. I actually shared that with another rabbi. I said, I have a nice little juicy, beautiful Devar Torah for you for Purim when that comes around, about this idea that not just sorer from the word sarah, but also holds us and binds us together. I wish that we can keep this unity and this feeling of caring. Somebody else? We have two. May. Ronit. Yeah. Oh, Ronit later. Oh, yay. Okay, we've got another mom with a baby coming. Okay. Last time we also spoke about Megillat Haman. Remember that? We spoke about this Megillah that's written, that I learned from Erica Brown, from her article, Scrolls of Hate and Hope. The scroll, oh, sorry, Megillat Hitler. Sorry, not Megillat Haman. A scroll of Hitler that is in some museums. We spoke about that a little bit, and how anti-Semitism seems to crop up every however many, few hundred or a few thousand years, and probably a few hundred. And we spoke about that as well. And what we left off with, hello, say hi to people on Zoom. We have Ronit and Liron. Liron, yes, I remember Liron. Nathan Liron, thank you for joining us. So I'm sorry, I'm just going to get a few. You sit here. I'm going to get a Tanakh for them. Give me a moment. I didn't expect that.
They did a much better job today.
Now, what we spoke about last time was the idea of learning Megillat Esther from a slightly different lens. I mean, we're so familiar with Megillat Esther that it sometimes can be hard to do it from another lens. And this lens will both be what we call the barefoot reading, which is reading the text and seeing what we take out of it, but actually even more, which we didn't do this with Megillat Ruth. We didn't do it as much with Megillat Kohelet. But in this particular case, we're actually going to take a lot of midrashim and see how our sages learned and took out from the text, added midrashim. Hello, somebody's looking at me. I got two pairs of little eyes looking at me. That they read into the words. They really looked carefully at the words of the text and said, well, these words feel extraneous. Well, these words feel extraneous. Now, I think that we're more used to hearing that about words being extraneous when we read the Torah, the 5 books. We do that less, let's say, in Judges, in Melachim and Kings. We don't really, but in the Megillah, and if you think about it, of all our rabbinic texts, we don't have other rabbinic texts that are a mitzvah to read. I think it's the only text other than Torah reading, which we do every week in Shul on Shabbat, and we do it during the week as well. But Megillat Esther feels like it's on another level. By the way, I don't know if you can see, I have a yellow thing. It says 103, which is the number of days that the hostages have been held in. As I'm trying to remember to do that, I leave out masking tape and magic markers so that every morning I will do it, as Hirsch's mom has asked us to do. So Dave, so just wanted you to know what that was. So the text of the Megillah feels elevated, I would say, from other rabbinic texts, because what other rabbinic texts do we have that we are obligated by a mitzvah? It's a rabbinic mitzvah. That's true. It's not biblical, but of course we keep rabbinic law equally as much as we keep biblical law. So the sages actually looked really, really carefully and said, why all these words? Now, we're so used to hearing these words, they just seem normal to us. We don't really think about it. Not just that, the text of the Megillah is very accessible because it's a story, as opposed to, let's say, Vayikra, Leviticus doesn't feel so accessible, or even some of our prophets feel, to me at least, Jeremiah, Isaiah, like those don't feel so accessible. So sometimes we're like, okay, so it's a story and it gets embellished with extra words, but that's not the way our sages saw it. So what we're going to do is actually read it through the eyes of many midrashim that I've been researching, but I also want to hear what you say and how you respond to it. And here are the themes that I would like us to think about as we go through. One of them, remember we spoke about Megillat Esther, that Esther means hidden, and we know that God's name is hidden. And yet our sages very, very carefully looked for God's hand, so to speak, in all different parts of the Megillah. So one thing I would like for us to note, where is it that we see God's hand? Now, we may see it through a midrash, we may see it through a text, but this is one of the themes that I would like us to keep in the backs of our minds. So everybody, and you're all welcome to raise your hand or interrupt or, nicely, obviously. And then I'm happy to hear, because I think it's the conversation, hi Lance, that makes it much more powerful, as you know, and hi Robert. And the main things we're looking for, where may we feel anti-Semitism and from which characters? Because I think it's very obvious to many of us who's the character who shows us the most what seems to be anti-Semitism, or at least some hatred to the Jews. Haman, that's why I called it Haman the Wicked. But guess what I've been discovering as I research, that according to Chazal, according to our sages, there were actually more characters in the Megillah that could be read that way. Now, you might say to me, okay, that's a midrash. Here it is to bring up. Well, I mean, why would our sages do that? Whenever there are midrashim, we said this last time. Does anybody remember what I said, what a midrash is last time? I quote my granddaughter. Remember that? Anybody remember what I said last time, what a midrash is? Okay, I'll keep repeating it till people remember. So my granddaughter, who is in her bat mitzvah year, and I was just learning with her this morning, Megillat Ruth, she was the one at age 5 who quoted her ganenet, her kindergarten teacher, when I was talking about what is pshat and what is drash. Pshat is pashut, simple, the reading of the text. Midrash is, as you know, what is midrash? Midrash is something more. So some people think it's story. So here's the way Inbar, my granddaughter, explained it. She said, pshat is when you explain the pasuk using the words of the pasuk. Midrash is when you explain the pasuk and it's not written in the pasuk. And that is the best explanation I've ever heard from Midrash. Now, even given that, why add Midrash at all? Anybody have a thought? Why do we add Midrash? Why not just use the plain text? Anybody have a thought? Speak up. Yeah.
What it allows it to do is it's a conversation where you're like, it's not just the text when it was written, but the text as it keeps being interpreted by every generation.
Beautiful. That's a great answer. Yes. It's adding layers and if I can say, tell me if I'm right, it makes it relevant. Adding midrash can make it feel relevant. What does it mean to us today? We might use the same pasuk and interpret it slightly differently. I'm just throwing it out there, given like feminism, for example, or given women's roles, we might interpret it just as an example, or given, advances in technology or something, or whatever it is that we might. Great. That's a great answer. Anybody else have another answer for when and why we have midrashim?
I have an explanation by Rabbi David Foreman. I'm not going to be quoting him exactly, but he talked specifically about a midrash that when Pharaoh's daughter saw Moshe in the Nile, that her hand, did she send her maidservant or did
Ama, so I'll just explain the word ama means forearm. And it also means a maidservant. Now, why is it the same word? Because maidservants do menial tasks. That's why it's the same word in Hebrew. Remember, Hebrew is not a rich language in the number of words, but it's very rich in the meaning. So yes, so some people interpreted as she stretched out her forearm. Some people said she sent her ama, her maidservant. Yes, go on.
And some people say that her forearm like literally extended.
Right.
And he was saying, okay, when there is something that, there's the Peshat meaning, and then there's something that the Midrash is saying that seems to contradict the Peshat meaning, don't take it as being a contradictory, look at it as a lesson for life. And basically what she was doing was extending herself to be able to raise.
Beautiful. And even sending her maidservant would be extending herself, because Paro obviously did not want her to do that. He didn't want her to save a Jewish baby. So yes, so that would be another way of understanding it. What lesson is Chazal trying to teach us? There is a reason that Chazal read anti-Semitism or hatred of the Jews or other whatever it is that we're going to find, and decided to teach us those lessons. So a midrash can be, so I'll give another answer that we didn't mention unless somebody wants to say. Sometimes a midrash fills in what I call the empty spaces and places in the text. Sometimes the text just doesn't always make 100% sense, or is missing something, is missing a layer of emotion, is missing an action, is missing something, and leaves itself open for interpretation. And I believe that God, it was Mordechai and Esther who wrote Megillat Esther. Maybe they also left room for interpretation, and they based that, perhaps the model was the 5 books of Torah, which also leaves places open for interpretation, like the word Amma actually has 2 interpretations, so both of them could be correct. Okay, great. All of this I want to keep in our mind as read it. Okay, where we left off last time was something called Megillat Sitarim Hallel. Megillat Sitarim. Somebody called it Sidarim, like Seder, like order. But the actual name, again, according to my research, this is not my expertise, but looking it up and reading different sources for it. This is under Jewish Encyclopedia. What do you hear in the word sitarim? Sitarim. Anybody hear something that feels relevant?
Seter,
yes. And that sounds like Esther.
Yeah.
right? Esther, and we said Esther can mean hidden, and Hester Panim is the term used for when God hides God's face. Hester Panim is face, and Hester Panim is what we term in Judaism. It's when God hides God's face. So there is a Hester, I don't know if I would call it Panim, because we think we do read God into the Megillah, but there is a Hester of God's name. God's name is not in the Megillah. We don't see God overtly, we see God covertly. So Megillat Sitarim in this case might be a play on words for Esther, but it also might be because it was hidden. It was actually a hidden scroll, and that it might be more than Megillat Esther, but in there is also Megillat Esther. So I just want to tell you what it says about it. I didn't know about it until I started reading about it and learning about it. So this is in the name of a scroll, Megillat Sittar. Remember, Megillah is a scroll, like Megillat Esther, Megillat Ruth. That was supposed to have been found in the Beit Midrash of Rabbi Chia, a very famous sage, and it contained halachot recorded by him, maybe more than halachot also. Some passages are even quoted by other sages in the Talmud itself, with the introductory phrase, I found a hidden role in the Beit Midrash of Rabbi Chia, which is kind of cool. According to Rashi, although everybody here heard of Rashi? Great. Although it was not permissible to record halachot, remember there's Torah shebichtav, Torah shebal peh, the written Torah and the oral Torah. For a long time, things that were discussed by our sages was not written down until it was decided that this would get lost, and it was more important to write it down than to keep it orally. Although it was not permissible to record halachot, the scholars were accustomed to write in scrolls which were then hidden such sentences and maxims of various Tanaim. Tanaim are those who wrote the Mishnah, that were seldom repeated in the schools and therefore would be liable to be forgotten. And Rashi says, it's pretty reliable, that the Megillat Sitarim was one of those scrolls. And some people don't agree with it, some people do. But in any case, Rabbi Chia, according to, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he is the one who codified the Mishnah and decided, the 6 Sidrei Mishnah. He decided what should go in, which of the Tanaitic discussions should go into these 6 Sidarim, these 6 sets or appendix to the Mishnah, except for Braitot, which we only find, we basically find them. The Gemara says, wait a minute, I know this Mishnah said this, but I remember another discussion. Those are called Braitot, but we're going to put them aside for now. According to this, Rabbi Chia hid his Megillah during Rebbe. Rebbe is the one who wrote the Mishnah, so he wouldn't offend him, because remember, it's like saying, you should have put this in, Rebbe, right? Because he's recording other conversations. So, but once Rabbi Yehuda Nasi died, you're not going to offend him. And then he was able to show it to other Tanaim. Okay, so that's where we're going to actually take. I don't actually have a copy of Megillat Sitarim, but luckily I'm listening to some wonderful podcasts about Megillat Esther, and the person who did the podcast either has access to it or learned it from other places. So we are going to draw on his knowledge. Okay, ready to start? All right, let us actually we're going to go, maybe not pasuk by pasuk. I mean, we have a few months to do this. We are not going to finish this by Purim, even though there are 2 Adars this year. That's not the goal. But the goal will be that Purim will happen right in the middle of our studying and shed new light and allow us to talk about a topic that both feels relevant and really hard, really hitting it. So where do we see it in actions? Today, I myself have trouble. I watch different interviews, I read different articles. How should we interpret these actions? How should we interpret these actions? It can be very confusing. This is showing that this is not a new idea. This has a long time. Okay, starting from the first pasuk. Vayhi b'mei Achashverosh. It was in the days of Achashverosh, Xerxes, I don't know how you pronounce it. Xerxes. Xerxes. Okay, I'll never get that right. I'm just going to stick to a hush, but it's in English, it's written like with a lot of X's. Who, Achashverosh, he is the Achashverosh. As if, or maybe there were many of them. Tamolad Kush, who says maybe 120 to say before I go into some. Anything jump out at you and feels extraneous, anything feels like you could learn from it. No wrong answers.
Feels weird to me that we're starting with the situation of the king and not the situation of the Jewish people.
Wow, beautiful. I didn't even think of that. Wow. Starting with, yeah, we're setting the scene. Thank you. We're setting the scene that can feel odd. Why aren't we starting with what happened to the Jews? You know, the reason the Torah didn't start with what happened to Jews is because it started from the beginning of the world. The creation leads us to the place of the Jews. And then once we get to the Jews, and that's what I can give you some information about that. So Toby is asking, why isn't the first pasuk? And it was when the Jews lived in Achashverosh's, okay, let's see if we answers to that. I'm just thinking as you ask that question, maybe there's a reason that the Megillah is actually spotlighting Achashverosh. Specifically, remember what I said before, it seems so obvious to us that Haman is the wicked one. But a lot of our commentators actually say, it wasn't just Haman. There were other people there who were also anti-Semites. So we can start already with
Ravani, Bracha, you're breaking up. The last thing I heard from you was Wes. I don't know if there's an internet connectivity at this show problem. If so, if you turn off your picture, we may hear you better.
I'm on Zoom.
Her. I'm going to text her to let her know.
I think we were cut off, Helen.
Yeah, we were cut off, but she's not on now. I think she lost internet connectivity. I'm going to text her.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know what happened, but I lost internet, came back again. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks for your patience and waiting. Rashi picks up very quickly on the words, Vayhi b'mei Achashverosh. It was in the days of Achashverosh. Who Achashverosh? So it does feel a little odd. Why is it repeating it? Like it could have said, and it was in the days of Achashverosh, who's ruling from Hodu till Cush, right? Do we really need who Achashverosh? He is that Achashverosh. So first of all, that tells us, like Paro, Paro was the name given. I don't know if Achashverosh was the name given, but the same way perhaps that we have in Jewish tradition, where people are named for their grandparents or their parents, and in many, many, many traditions, it seems that there was more than one Achashverosh. The first thing Rashi says, Hu Achashverosh berisho, in his wickedness. He was wicked from beginning to end. So Rashi is picking up on the fact that it says, Hu Achashverosh, it was that bad guy. And that, I think, for Rashi and perhaps for others, sets the tone for the whole Megillah. It is not just Haman. In fact, according to some of the commentaries, Haman was just the secondary one. It was actually Achashverosh who from the beginning planned it. I'm going to give you some background. The Gra, people know what the Gra is, the Vilna Gaon. He says like this. He said, actually, this Achashverosh is the second Achashverosh in history. It was the end of the 70 years. Remember, there was 70 years of exile between the end of the first Beit HaMikdash until the Jews came back and the second Beit HaMikdash started getting built. At the end of this time period was when this Ahasuerus reigned. The previous one had a son, Daryabush, so maybe it's his grandfather, I guess, who allowed the Jews, people heard that name, Daryabush, he's the one who allowed the Jews to come back to Israel and build the second Beit HaMikdash. They weren't allowed to. That already teaches us how much anti-Semitism ruled at the time. They were allowed to do things. They weren't allowed to do things. He took over from somebody named Koresh, maybe it was a great-grandfather, I don't know. The Midrash said that prior to this year, which is the third year, right? It says that B'shnat Shalosh Lemolcho. It says, right, in the third pasuk, it says in the third year of his reign. What happened in the first 2 years? He had ruled over the entire planet or the known world at that time. I mean, I don't think America was discovered yet, so I don't think that counts. But the whole area around where he lived, Persia, that whole area, and I guess including Israel, or whatever it was called at that time. But now he only had 127 provinces. So this is setting it, maybe Toba, that's also part of the reason, it's setting it in history. So the question that the Gra asks is, wait a minute, if the previous 2 years he had ruled over the entire world, or at least much more than 127 provinces, and now he only has 127 provinces, why is he making a party? We all know that in a few verses, he's going to make a party. Shouldn't he have been sad? Shouldn't he have been in mourning? According to the geography at the time, almost half of his monarchy had been taken from him. So according to this, which is a little bit mind-boggling because I think today we don't see people of other religions or non-Jews looking towards our sources or believing in God and following what we think is God's prophecy or what God wants for us. But he actually took it as a sign of divine providence that half of his kingdom rebelled, but the 127 that were left all had the Jews. According to this reading, it wasn't just any 127 that were left, specifically the one that had the Jews. Remember, we said there were Jews in all those provinces. It sounds like there weren't Jews anywhere else, only in those 127. And in his understanding, this was a sign that God was allowing him to kill the Jewish people. Why? So I'll teach you something. The Gemara in Psachim says that Hashem performs a kindness to the Jews when God scatters us among the nations. Why? Because God forbid then it would be impossible to annihilate the whole Jewish nation at once. Because when the Jew, like think about the Shoah. So many millions of people were killed, but people who didn't live in those countries were not at the time because they weren't part of the Shoah. I mean, I'm not trying to explain the Shoah, obviously, at all. And it's horrible, but it's seen as a kindness when God scattered us. But what happens when all of the Jews are under one ruler? So according to Ahasuerus's thinking, again, I don't know why he would know our teachings, but, and this shows such a deep and abiding hatred of Jews, that this would give him joy, that he would know that the 127 provinces all had Jews, and therefore it's as if he got a green light from God that he could annihilate the Jews. So this, even just from the first pasuk and from this midrash, this sets a different tone for me for the whole Megillah. Now, I just want to say, you could agree or not agree. There are other ways of learning the Megillah. This is the lens that I chose in order to include anti-Semitism. A lot of it feels like it could be real. It wasn't like I read things and said, oh, no, that's completely, out of the scope of possibility. Okay, please.
So, if he had just lost a huge part of his kingdom, then it also sets his mental state, it would make sense that he would be anxious at this time. It would make sense that
It
he's
would make
looking
sense.
for something to grasp onto, to get
Yes.
more power, to
Yes.
get more, that's
Great.
often how I think about anti-Semitism. It's like a scapegoat or something. Right. So if he's
Nice.
just lost half his kingdom in his third year, he's thinking how do I
Right. How do I
win back
turn it?
respect? Or
Beautiful. And that actually is a great lead into the next midrash. Thank you for setting the tone for that. She's not a plant, I promise. It was all her thought. But it actually really makes sense. Okay, we're going to get there. So we're going to hold that thought because I just do want to go according to the according to the psukim, but I want to keep that thought. I just want to add one more thing. The Gemara also says that every time it says Vayihi bimei, and this maybe does answer Toby's question, why are we starting with Achashverosh and we're not starting with the Jews in the first pasuk? That the Gemara in Megillah says that in Psachim, no, wait, 1 second. Yeah, in Megillah says that whenever it says Vayihi bimei, it always indicates a tzara, something bad for the Jews. Every time. What was the bad thing here? The Gemara continues to say that Hodu and Kush, remember me, Hodu v'yad Kush? Everybody remember that from whatever they are in English? I don't know. They are Hodu to Kush. That's what it says in my English here. That they were either at the ends of the world, the known world, or they were actually neighboring countries, meaning that it was the whole encircled area between them. And because he ruled over these countries, he had the possibility, which is perhaps what he wanted to do, to go back and rule over the entire world. And consequently, we had the fear that at that time, he would annihilate the whole Jewish people. So I just want to add, by Hibime, it was in the days of, if we understand this, using the Gemara's explanation that it was bad, that probably led the Gemara and maybe Rashi to understand why hu Achashverosh, he is that bad Achashverosh, because if as the Gemara understands, Vayhi bimei is always something bad for the Jews, then what can we learn from this pasuk that teaches us that? So holding in mind that this was the Achashverosh he had actually inherited from Koresh, who had ruled over what was called the entire world. He lost half the provinces. Perhaps now he's looking for a way to get back and maybe using the Jews either as a scapegoat or as something else to help him reclaim that power. Okay. Ready to go on to, yes, please, Felice, you have something to say? Just unmute, please. You're muted.
You can hear me now.
Yeah,
Can hear.
But
Okay.
Judy, I called on Felice, so 1 minute. Felice.
Okay, yes, now I don't know. Okay, I just want to say in my Megillah, it says Hodu to Kush, usually translated India to Ethiopia.
Right.
Okay.
That's what it throughout.
Judy, you went off camera, by the way. You might want to come back on. Thank you.
You're
So
welcome.
that is from India to Ethiopia. Thank you. Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Very welcome.
Okay. All right. Going on to the second pasuk. We're keeping all these thoughts in mind.
May I?
Yes, Judy. But
Okay,
Judy,
I just wanted to say that this whole first part, this introduction, it sounds like it's echoing of Shemot and how Paro is analogous to Achashverosh here.
Yep.
And the whole beginning, and even like the Jews settled in Goshen. Here you're talking about the Jews settling in the 127
Nice.
Medinot.
Yep, very nice. And who knows if perhaps they were in their own little neighborhoods in each of these provinces. That would make sense. Jews
Right.
As every ethnic group or religious group tends to be together. Very nice. Thank you, Judy. Beautiful, beautiful comparison. Okay, second pasuk. Bayamim ahem, in those days, Keshevet HaMelech Achashverosh, when the king Achashverosh was sitting al kisei malchuto, on the throne of his kingdom, Asher b'Shushan Habira, which is in Shushan, the capital. Now, I do want to say that sometimes it's called, 1 second, what is it? Sometimes it's called Ha'ir Shushan, the city of Shushan. Does that sound familiar to people? And sometimes it's called Shushan Habira, Shushan, the capital. And again, commentaries have noticed this. So I'm going to get to that in a moment. Here it says Shushan Habira. Okay, 1 second. The Gra, the Vilna Gaon asks, why? So this is a beautiful midrash that I read as a child. Why does the verse tell us that Achashverosh's capital was in Shushan? Why is that important to us? Now, we do know that later on that the Jews in Shushan, remember the Shushan Purim, that the Jews in Shushan ended up fighting one more day. So maybe there was a reason, but why does it need to tell us now? We don't actually even know where Shushan is, particularly, at least reading it today. So he says like this. Does anybody here know any midrash about Shlomo's throne Anybody ever read about that? I used to read Legends of King David and Legends of King Solomon and Legends of da as a child. I loved them. I thought they were beautiful. There was a legend that Shlomo's throne was the most fantastical thing you have ever seen. Did you ever read about that? It's literally like Fantastical Beasts of the Wild, whatever it's called. It was a fantastic throne where it had a certain number of steps, maybe 15. At every step, there were two animals. And when Shlomo put his foot on the step, the animals would sense him, S-E-N-C-S-E, and would lift him to the next step. Like there was, a lion, there were every single animal. They were all animals. And every time he put his foot on the next step, remember Shlomo was considered very, very wise, like a Leonardo da Vinci of his time. And so he was able to, according to the Midrash, concoct this. At the very top, after the animals had lifted him, the final animal put a crown on his head and a beautiful scent, S-C-E-N-T, was released. Now, there was a Paro, one of the Egyptian kings, who tried to sit on the throne. But what happened was that the animal sensed that it wasn't Shlomo and struck him in the leg. So he was called from then on Paro the Lame. And everybody else was scared to do it, even though they all envied. You can imagine, like, that is how kings showed their power, was when they had this huge throne. I mean, we don't have that here, but anybody who's been to Europe or England and has seen a huge throne, and, the king sits, at the end of the room and is dominating the room, and the more power and glory, the more intimidated people would feel. Achashverosh. So again, this is a midrash. It doesn't have to do with anti-Semitism, except that it does have to do with the fact that they were envious of Shlomo, and it showed how at one point the Jews did have dominance, at least in Israel, and other people were aware of it. So Achashverosh tried to duplicate Shlomo's throne, and even though he wasn't able to duplicate the wheels and the machinery, it was a huge throne. It was built in Shushan, but it was so big that it couldn't be moved. So he moved his capital to Shushan. So according to the Gra, the reason it says B'Shushan Abirah is because he built this throne and he wanted to use it as his throne, but he wasn't able to move it. So therefore, it was in Shushan. And it turns out, according to the Gra, but there's a different explanation also, that a lot of the exiled Jews from Bavel were actually in Shushan, and that the Sanhedrin, the 70 elders, were in Shushan. So one way, according to the Gra, understanding it, is that it all seems to happen in the same place, like as if it just was happenstance that he built it in Shushan. But it turns out that the Jews were there, which is maybe the reason why they needed to have another day to fight. Maybe there were just many, many more Jews in Shushan, according to this understanding. But there's also another understanding. Okay, so we're going to get to that too. I'm just showing how our sages were weaving the connection. Like, we're just 2 psukim in, and already there is so much connection with the Jews. So these are all hidden behind the psukim. And you have to do a lot of digging and thinking. And I was just totally amazed to see how many people had spent the time, and our sages, to connect with the Jews, behind each pasuk. B'shnat shalosh l'mochon, the 3rd year, I'm in the 3rd pasuk. Just gonna mute you. No, I can't mute you. Felice, can you mute yourself, please?
Yeah, okay.
The 3rd year of his reign, Asa Mishteh, he made a feast to all his ministers and his servants, the army of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of the provinces who were near him. Okay, 1 second. I just want to skip 1 second to pasuk 5. Do you see that it says that he made bimlo I'm going to skip 4 because I want to get back to it. And at the end of those days, the king, Asa HaMelech, lechol ha'am, to the whole nation. By the way, again, this is interpreting it as the Jewish nation, hanimtzaim b'Shushan Habirah, who happened to be or were resident or were found in Shushan Habirah. This goes back to the question, why sometimes is it called Shushan Habirah and why sometimes it's called Ha'ir Shushan? So there is a different interpretation, that there was the capital city of Shushan and there was a suburb called Shushan. And the Jews were not allowed to live in the capital city of Shushan. By the way, this is exactly the opposite of what we said before, that most of the Jews lived in the capital city of Shushan. So there are different interpretations, but everybody tried to find their way of understanding how is it connected to the Jews from the beginning. So according to this interpretation, which actually makes so much sense, because why else does it say sometimes Shushan Habirah, the capital city, and sometimes Sa'ir Shushan, the city of Shushan? So if you imagine that there was a suburb called Shushan, lowercase Shushan, let's say we'll call it, and the Jews were allowed to live there, then it makes sense to say that when he made a party, then all the Jews who happened to be visiting Shushan Habirah at that time, Hanimtsaim, who happened to be there. Nimtsa means you're found or you're in that place. Like right now, Ani nimtzet, I'm found, I am here in HIR. So it's only the Jews who happened to be there that day. And because they were there that day, they ended up being invited to the feast. So, and that to me made sense from another direction, because that already showed that even at the time that Jews were allowed into certain country clubs and were not allowed into others. So for whatever reason, that Shushan Habirah, the capital, they weren't allowed to live there. Does that sound like a familiar trope, that Jews are or aren't allowed into certain places? I'm just going to pause for 1 minute and see if there are any thoughts. I know I'm giving a lot of information. I'd be happy to hear if anybody has any thoughts so far. We got one baby asleep. We're working on the other one. No?
It makes so much sense
Yes, Hallel. What did you want to say?
in Parak, at the end of Parak Daled.
Say
or
it in
no,
English,
sorry,
Jess?
at the end of Parak Gimel.
Just
Oh, sorry, at the end of
the third
the
chapter,
third
yep.
chapter, there's a pasuk that has both Shushan Habirah and Ha'ir Shushan, and it makes so much sense because in Shushan Habirah, the king and Haman are sitting to drink because they made this new plan,
nice.
but then Ha'ir Shushan Navocha.
Oh my God, I have
Right.
goosebumps. That is
That, like, works
beautiful.
so
Say that in
well.
English, what that means.
But the city, the
The capital, they're sitting
they're
to
sitting having a
celebrate.
drink, right? And then
Wow.
in the city of Shushan, this one says dumbfounded.
That's
crying.
amazing. Navocha is actually like this, like your head is held down, like you're feeling Navocha is you're in confusion or upsetness. Wow, brilliant. Thank you, Toby. Yes. So that fits beautifully, beautifully. So that's at the end of the third chapter. Remember when Haman and Ahasuerus start planning together. That's really, really nice. So we'll remember that when we get to that. But that follows this explanation that there was Shushan Habirah, the capital city, and then there was a suburb called the city of Shushan. So when they were having the party, they were in the capital city, they were allowed to stay. But then they went back to their home, which was the city, the suburb, we'll call it lowercase Shushan and capital. Very nice, beautifully, beautifully added. Okay, Nimtsaim. All right, now, let me just see if I have anything. Okay. So much to share. Okay. We are talking about why would it be that Ahasuerus, who was only ruling over 127 provinces, and we're assuming that he inherited the whole world, whatever that meant, more than 127. Let's assume another 127. That's an assumption that's made. Why is he celebrating? So the suggestion was made, thank you, that he needs to do something to re-show his power, to regain, to kind of get control using the Jews as a scapegoat, perhaps, or as something on the way. Okay. Just want to say, I just want to give you a little background here. That the reason he did it, the party was part of a greater political coup to establish himself as sole ruler because he didn't want it to chunk even smaller. So what do you do when you feel weak? You show more power. You don't show weakness. You make sure that people say, oh no, I'm totally good. I'm in charge. I'm not going to get less. Maybe I'll even get more. That he did it to impress Sarei Parasu Madai, the chiefs or the ministers of Parasu Madai, Persia and Madai, whatever that is. Okay. That Babylonia had actually been at war with Persia for many years. 70 years before, remember when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the temple? He was the ruling power of the earth, and he was literally gobbled up everybody. Nebuchadnezzar, but it's hard for me to say that in English. Nebuchadnezzar was the most powerful ruler alive, and he reigned after the destruction of the temple another 25 years. But after he died, there was a major war with his son Belshazzar between Persia and Babylonia, Persia won. Okay, and Achashverosh, who had taken over Persia from Koresh, effectively became ruler of the earth. But because it was such a huge area, he couldn't control the whole thing. And the many people who had been loyal to Babylonia, to Babel, he wasn't able to establish his kingship, even if theoretically he had. It's also not like today where you can send out a broadcast. I mean, you actually had to send out riders. That's what they did for the 127 provinces as well. This party, remember, have we done that yet? Yeah, we said that he had a party. That's in verse 3. Was part of a major political coup to establish himself as the primal ruler. And according to the Gra, the Vilna Gaon, who knew that the Vilna Gaon spent so much time on Gilat Esther? It was not just an invitation to the officers, it was also his wedding party to Vashti. So we all know about Vashti. We haven't read about her yet, but we're going to find out about her soon. She was a daughter of Baal Shetzar. So remember, she's now a granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. So what does this do? It puts Babylonia, that's what happens in kingdoms, is that the marriages are actually political moves. They're not because they fell in love with each other. It's to establish control by putting together different kingdoms. She was actually the inheritor of the Babylonian kingdom. Somebody says that everybody else was actually killed and she was the only one left. And then he joins the Babylonian, the Bavel, and Persian forces. Coincidentally, she was very beautiful. Remember, he says, I know we're going to get to it, that he wants to show her beauty. But that's not the reason he married her, or not the only reason. The wedding feast made him fully and completely in power. All right, I want to do verse 4. Are we good? Any questions, any thoughts, any comments? Okay. This is really, a lot of us may remember that in the, one second, I'll get to that. Let's look at verse 4, Bahar Oto, when he is showing. So look how many words the verse uses. Osher kivod malchuto, the riches of the glory of his kingdom. Ve'et yakar tiferet gedulato, and the splendor of his excellent majesty. That's what I'm reading in this English. Yamim rabim, for many days, shmonim u'ma'at yom, 180 days. So something there seems extraneous. Either we don't need 180 or we don't need many days. I mean, again, like if we're writing it as a fairy tale or something, you always want to add words and make it more, right? That actually creates a scene. Friends. Okay. So, but the Midrash picks up on that and says in a few different ways. First of all, why was it 180 days? Friends. Okay. We got pizza delivery going on or something. It's okay, they're gone. Why is it important? It could have been many days, it could have been 180. Why 180? That feels a little bit random. I mean, it is 6 months, but it still feels a little bit random. Okay. So according to our tradition, there is a tradition that Nebuchadnezzar, remember, he's the one who destroyed the temple, had hidden 1,080 treasure houses or treasures found in houses, and he had hidden them away because he didn't want people to steal them. But Achashverosh managed to find them, 1,080. Remember that number, 1080. Each day he showed up 6 of these treasures. Now, how did we get to 6? Look in the pasuk. When he showed Behar Oto, Osher, that's word 1, that's the richness, Kivod, his glory, Malchuto, his kingdom, Ve'et Yakar, and it says here splendor, it could be, Yakar is expensive, so it could be splendor. Tiferet, majesty, excellent. Gedulato, Gedulato is excellent. We have 6 words. What did he show? He showed in 6 words. If you take 1,080 and you divide it by 6, get to 180 days. So every day he showed off 6 of these treasures that they had stolen from the Jews, because he had discovered Nebuchadnezzar's secret hidden treasure troves. Okay, everybody with me on that, Midrash? Great. Okay, we're going to continue to Pasukei. We read already. We're going to read it the full. Now, when these 180 days were finished, when they were done, that was for everybody. That wasn't just for the Jews. Asah melech lechol ha'am. So according to, remember what we said before, The Am here would be Am Yisrael, the nation of Israel. Because as Toby so beautifully pointed out, why do we have this book? It's not a history book to tell us about Achashverosh. The center part of it is the Jewish people and what was the annihilation that they tried for the Jewish people, that they tried to enact against us. So the sages or whoever's writing these commentaries are looking for hints of where it talks about the Jews in every word, in every pasuk. So now he made to the Am Hanimtzaim b'Shushan Habirah. So let's go back to what we learned before, that it's just the people who happen to be in Shushan Habirah because, I don't know, they were going to do their official business, or that's where the marketplace was. They weren't allowed to live there. They were only allowed to visit there, according to that midrash. Limigadol vad katan, from the greatest to the smallest. That doesn't necessarily mean age. That could just mean I don't know what it means, but it could be the leaders of the Jewish people, everybody. Mishteh Shivat Yamim, a feast of 7 days. B'chatzar ginat bitan hamelech, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. Just see if I have anything on that. Okay, so again, according to the commentaries I just said, who is the Am? The Gemara says it is Mordechai and the Sanhedrin and the rest of the Jews. So that would be, remember the Sanhedrin is the 70 people who were the seat of halachic power, I guess, for the Jews, or they're the ones who made halachic decisions and other decisions. So that would be Migadol Vad Katan, from the greatest to the smallest. So this is hinting that it included Mordechai and the Sanhedrin. Again, according to one explanation, that's where they lived, was in Shushan Habirah. But according to this other one, which to me reads better, who happened to be there that day, and the Lamigadol, from the greatest, Gadol is big, Katan is small, the greatest were the leaders to the commoners, meaning the commoners, people who weren't the rabbis. Let's put it that way, I guess, if we say it that way. Okay, just see if we should read verse 6. We could do 6 and 7. Okay. Do people have time? I mean, it's almost 12 o'clock. People have a couple more minutes to finish up. Okay. What did he do? What did he show? What did he have there? I mean, this is gorgeous. By the way, I can show, I also got this book, which is a new book. It's a graphic novel. I have to show you the picture. Just going to spotlight myself for one moment. I love graphic novels. I thought this was really cool. Somebody recommended it to me. Just a moment. Cannot spotlight myself. All right, I won't do it today. I'll do it next time, but I'll show you the picture. I know people can see it. You see the picture of how gorgeous it was? This is all the different colors. And I always, as a child, even today, I mean, if you just put aside, who did it, but it's fantastic. It's like an Aladdin, in the cave. That's what it makes me feel like. It's really a beautiful picture of it. I'll show it more in the future. It doesn't have trup in here, Toby. So I couldn't even sing it according to the trup. I'd have to have another book if I ever wanted to sing something. That's weird. Oh, it's in here. Right. Good point. I didn't notice it. Okay. There were white, green, and blue hangings embroidered with cords of fine linen and purple on rods of silver and pillars of marble. Wow. Couches of gold and silver. Mitot zahav v'chesef. Al ritzpat bahat v'shesh v'dar v'socharet, on a pavement of green, white shell, and onyx marble. By the way, the people notice that in the Megillah, you could look in the Hebrew, the word chur, the letter chet is larger. Everybody see that? Now, anybody know why it's larger? There's always a reason. So this alludes to the eight, chet in Gematria is 8, the 8 garments of the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, that previous rulers only felt comfortable wearing the 4 garments of the simple Kohanim, the simple priest. And if anybody here ever saw Raiders of the Lost Ark, so towards the end of the movie, when they think they found the Aron, the ark, the person who found it put on all the garments. That'll maybe give you a picture of what those garments look like. So chet, it's really a nice midrashic interpretation of it. Why is it chet? Because it is all 8. Chet is 8 in Gematria in the numerical coding. I think we're going to stop here and we will continue with verse 7. Any thoughts before we go?
At the beginning of the session, you asked if we picked up anything from last week. I forgot to say,
Robert Moshe, yes.
I forgot to say that you spoke about the kiddush and the minimal amount of fluid required for a kiddush.
No, that was in the Kiddush one. That was in the Chabura. That wasn't in this one.
Oh,
Because I
okay,
taught 2 classes that you went to.
okay, I mixed this one. Okay, I mixed this.
Well, I can
class-
understand that because they were drinking wine, so that makes sense. But I don't think they did a shiur of Kiddush. As a matter of fact, what we're going to learn, I wrote myself a note, was that he supersized them. So it
Okay.
wasn't the minimal Kiddush.
Okay, but in any case, prior to this past Shabbos, I had in fact been making Shabbos
Kiddush.
with the 1 ounce schnapps, and I corrected it this past Shabbos.
Baruch Hashem, thank you. Now you gave me a lot of nachat. That is great. So you're fulfilling the mitzvah in the way it should be. Kiddush cup has to be at least 3.03 ounces. 3.03. All right, my friends. Next week, I'm away on a fellowship in Philadelphia, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but we will reconvene in 2 weeks. I want to thank everybody for joining, and more to share next time as we will go through the Megillah, and happy to hear your thoughts. And thank you for joining. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.